Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy. Today's episode, as always on Friday, is a weekly review, this week being the week ending the 16th of June 2017. So as ever, be going over the week's news, giving my opinions on what's occurred, how it may impact a team in the upcoming 2017 season, as well as any players that may be involved, and possibly even beyond in the case of some news. And at the end of all that, I'll be giving you my top 10 non-pass rushing linebackers in the NFL. So it's a good list. I think you'll find that highly entertaining. So big piece of breaking news today, and this is a tough one. Terron Armstead, left tackle for the New Orleans Saints, has a torn shoulder labrum. He is set to miss 4 to 6 months. Now, of course, if that time frame is 6 months, that ends up being the season essentially ended. It's hard to imagine that this isn't going to impact the Saints. This is one of the better left tackles in all of football. Of course, the Saints offense is expected to be the strength of the team once again, as has pretty much been the story the majority of Drew Brees and Sean Payton's time there. But Armstead, I think you could make a legitimate argument that he's the second best player on that offense. Missing that amount of time is a huge blow to this team. I'm not sure who's necessarily going to step up. They're certainly highly unlikely to play to that same level. Armstead, for me, one of the top 5 or 6 left tackles in football, a Pro Bowl caliber player. This move's going to hurt. Now, the Saints play a very quick style of passing attack, so it's possible they'll get a serviceable play from the replacement, whoever that ends up being. But there's no doubt it's very difficult to replace a player on this level. I think the Saints are a team that as long as Breeze is there is a shot at this team contending for the playoffs. But I think with the Nick Fairley news from last week, followed by this, things are certainly looking a lot more difficult for this team. I think this is terrible news for the player. He has battled some injuries over the last couple of seasons. If he can come back sort of just down the stretch in time for a playoff run, knock the rust off in a couple of weeks, then this may not end up being a big deal. But it's very hard for me to imagine this not being a significant blow to this Saints team. I thought they were ready to contend. I'm not so sure now. I really do think that this, after the Fairley news last week, really does put the Saints behind the 8 ball in the NFC South. So this is terrible, terrible news for the Saints and for the player, of course. I've also got Jalen Ramsey undergoing surgery for, what's this here? A core muscle injury that he suffered during OTAs. Doesn't sound like he's necessarily going to miss much time, maybe a little bit of camp. I always try to look at this stuff in the context that if they're saying they won't miss time, it shouldn't be a big deal, but I think you've always got to be aware of it. You hear all the time about players having these small nagging injuries, coming back too soon, getting hurt as a result, or just playing at a below average level that ends up dragging on as they've not recovered properly. I think the Jags have to be smart about this one. Ramsey's going to be an integral part of this team, not just this season, but in the years to come. I would hope that they would hold him out until he's fully recovered. It is something I don't think teams do enough of. I don't think players help themselves. Of course, they want to be out there. Not sure this is necessarily going to end up a big deal. I hope it doesn't, but it's definitely a story worth keeping an eye on, especially if he struggles at the start of the season. I've got Michael Floyd failing some alcohol tests. What a surprise. I'm not even going to comment on this fellow. Frankly, he's well on his way to being out of the league. Got Dione Smith's ready to actually hit the field. I wish the best for him. Cowboys certainly need him. This defense does not look good on paper. Overperformed last season. Him and Shawn Lee could be a really good tandem. The other position groups look pretty weak. So we'll see what happens there. We've also got trade news yesterday. Greg Robinson has been traded, the mega bust, from the Rams to the Lions. This clearly a reaction to Taylor Decker's injury. He may end up also missing significant time. A lot of the same stuff applies there as did with the Saints. Actually a very similar situation. I think Decker had a fantastic rookie season. If he misses significant time, it's a big deal, especially considering the offensive line looks like the strongest group in the Lions roster. And if he has to miss some time, well, he is going to miss some time by all accounts. Robinson, I don't know if they're going to be able to get anything out of him. I mean, he has been that bad. Playing guard, playing tackle, it doesn't matter where they've put him in, St. Louis or LA, it has not worked out for a 6th rounder. So, low stakes. I'm sure the Rams aren't concerned about getting rid of him. They've just got something for nothing, basically. I wouldn't have been shocked if Robinson was cut. Who knows? Of course, he was drafted 2nd overall. The physical talent's there. Whether he can put it together, I'm not sure. Personally, based on what I've seen, I wouldn't have even took this flyer on if I was the Lions. But they do have to try and do something, I guess, to fill that hole. And we've also got the Colts, who are perennially cursed at running back lately. It seems Christine Michael may have been his last chance in the NFL, and he's now being put on IR. So I think, honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if that's it for him. He's had problems, grasping playbooks, being a solid professional from several accounts, bounced around the league in spite of the clear physical talent. A big injury, I think that could be the end of him at this point in time. So that's the news for this week. If there's anything I missed out, just let me know, whether it's in the comment section below. I will look to get to it as soon as possible. But of course, clearly the big news there, the injury news for both the Saints and the Lions. So I think these teams were on, the teams you could see fighting for a wild card spot, possibly their divisions if teams ahead of them have down seasons. These moves definitely hurt. Offensive line play, of course, absolutely vital in this league. So my top 10 linebackers in the NFL. This list was certainly an interesting one to construct. Basically what I've done to give it a bit more of a unique feel to it is I've eliminated pass rushers from the list. You can see where the pass rushers rank, like, your Justin Houstons, your Von Millers, your outside linebackers that really play more like defensive ends the vast majority of the time. You can see where I've ranked them in the pass rushers episode, exterior pass rushers, that I did a few weeks ago. So I think that episode, is well worth a watch if you want to find out where some of those players rank. This purely for traditional run and tackle coverage linebackers, your 4-3 linebackers, your 3-4 inside backers. So with that caveat out of the way, onto the list. Coming in at number 10. In fact, I'll get a couple of honourable mentions out of the way here. A couple of older players who would have cracked the list if I wasn't necessarily expecting some kind of decline from them. We've got Derek Johnson, suffered another major injury, and frankly he can't keep on playing forever. I believe it was torn Achilles last season for the Chiefs. Had a great career. And also Thomas Davis, still played well last year. Still certainly could end up playing better than some of the guys I've got on this list, but I'm trying to look a little bit ahead to the future. These are guys in the kind of order, if you were starting a team today, you'd probably want to take ahead of a guy who's had 3 knee surgeries and is approaching the point in his career where decline could happen at any point. So coming in at number 10, we've got Buccaneers middle linebacker Quan Alexander. This guy's a tackling machine, as a real traditional Tampa 2 style middle linebacker, slightly undersized but great range, really good tackler. Misses a few, but he's always around the ball, gets in on a lot of plays. I believe end up, if you combine tackles, was in the top 5 last season. Had a great rookie season that ended up being cut short by a PED suspension, according to him, an energy drink with a banned supplement in it, which, if that's the case, that's just unfortunate. But either way, I think he's made a real difference to this Tampa defence when he's on the field. Him and Lavonte David, I think, are one of the better tandems in the league. Yeah, he's solid in coverage. I think he could stand to improve there to really climb up this list. That's where he needs to make more of an impact. But against the run, maybe not the best if you can get your hands on him, but he's difficult to get to. Reads the game very well, gets a lot of tackles for loss, good blitzing linebacker. I do expect to see the Buccaneers doing a lot more double A gap blitzing with Lavonte David and Quan Alexander next year. So I think they're a very dangerous pair when they're allowed to do that. Obviously, you can only do it in so many times a game, but I think that combination with Chris Baker and Gerald McCoy, that's going to be a pretty scary thought. He's just developed into a really good young all-around player. Part of the reason he's on this list is because I think he's only going to get better at his year 3 now, and he's got a bit more talent around him in that front 7 than the Buccaneers have had over those first 2 seasons of his career. So I expect him to have a very good season. Last year was very productive, played incredibly well, and the Buccaneers defence improved massively as they became more familiar with the scheme. Second half of the season, I thought, were a pretty darn good unit after some horrific performances early in the season. But I think you can put a lot of that down to them learning a new scheme. Coming in at number 9, a fairly similar player, and we're sticking in the state of Florida. Jaguars linebacker Alvin Smith. This is the kind of player that, simply playing for the Jags does not help with being a recognisable name in the NFL. Of course, he was also a mid-round draft pick. Fairly similar to Quan Alexander in a lot of ways. This a rangy player, a tackling machine. Posluszny's been a good player for them for a number of years, but Alvin Smith is the clean-up guy. He's got the range that allows them to have a middle linebacker with a very limited range like Posluszny. I think there's potential for Miles Jack and Smith to be one of an incredibly effective pairing in the middle for the Jags over the next few years. The 4-3 outside backer spot never gets enough attention, ever. That's been the case for a long time. But Smith is a really good Pro Bowl caliber type player. And again, this guy is solid in coverage. Again, that's where I'd like to see him maybe step up his game a little bit. But he's, today's inside backers, outside backers in the 4-3 scheme, they're not quite the, some of the big guys that we saw 10, 20 years ago. They are, very athletic now, much faster, smaller guys. Technique is everything as a tackler, I think. Being able to play in space. I think this guy's one of the better space backers in the league. And again, an unsung hero because he's been playing for Jacksonville. But a very, very good player. Coming in at number 8 is the only rookie on the list, and that is the Atlanta Falcons' Dione Jones. I think this guy improved with just about every week last season. I don't think it's a great front 7 there in Atlanta for the most part. I think he stood out to me, in spite of Vic Beasley's sack numbers, as probably the best player in the group. Again, rangy. I think he played well in coverage for a rookie. Again, it's something I'd like to see improve, but I think he does a good job playing a fairly traditional cover 2 sort of scheme at times. He can defend the middle of the field well, particularly in zone. I'm not sure I'd trust him in man at this point, but I'd expect that to improve in time. Again, you can see this guy's leadership, especially as a rookie, coming into what's a fairly experienced group at a lot of spots. They brought in a lot of rookies, but it was a good mix, I think, in Atlanta last year. And as he improved, the rest of that group did. I can see this guy certainly making a big jump in this list next year. Really impressed me again. A very rangy, athletic player and a real solid tackler. Very rarely caught out of position last season, which is, that's what I'm looking for from a young linebacker. Coming in at number 7, we've got Eric Kendricks of the Minnesota Vikings. It was difficult. I kind of wanted to put Anthony Barr in here, but he does rush the passer a lot, so I guess I can deem him another honourable mention. But I think Kendricks is, again, a kind of unheralded player. It feels that way about a lot of this Vikings defence. I think they're an absolutely stellar group, but they play so well at each level that it's very... They don't really have any one player that stands out enormously, but Kendricks just always seems to be around the ball. I think he's a very effective player in that scheme. Whether he'd be able to... Actually, no, I think he could probably play in any scheme. A little bit different to some of the guys on this list. I think he's a bit more of a thumper type linebacker, but I wanted to include somebody that sort of fits that description. And the Vikings... It's a tough defence to evaluate because, as I say, there's so much quality there. Just kind of wanted to have a representative. I think he's a very good young player. He should continue to improve. I think he's best used aggressively, and I expect the Vikings to continue to use him and Barr in that manner in that defence. Coming in at number 6, I've got Shawn Lee of the Dallas Cowboys. He's just a great player, incredibly smart. Not, again, like most of these guys, not the biggest, but phenomenal tackler, great rangy athlete. Would have received a lot more plaudits over his career if he'd just been able to stay healthy. Of course, playing in Dallas does help. That's the reason I think he's not been sort of a forgotten man. But the difference between them with him on the field and with him off the field is massively significant. And I think that's one of the best measures for the overall effectiveness of a player in this league. One of the best coverage backers in the NFL. I easily could have put him up higher on this list, to be honest, but I've chose to go with this group more than any other, with a bit more of an emphasis on youth. And I don't know, I just look at that Cowboys defence and I am sort of trying to think ahead to next year, and I've got no doubt Shawn Lee's going to pile up numbers. I think the Cowboys group on paper looks like it's going to be a pretty poor unit. As I've said before, I think they played well above their talent level last season. He's a perfect fit for this scheme, and I expect to see massive numbers from him. Could easily end up leading the league in tackles. Great coverage back, really solid all round, no real holes in his game. Coming in at number 5, we're heading to the AFC North, and we've got the Ravens' CJ Mosley. He has been steadily improving throughout his time in the league. Probably not as impactful early on in his career as a lot of people would have expected. He was talked about as absolutely pro ready, etc., etc., like a lot of these Alabama linebackers are. Last season, I think we saw him really grow into the role as a leader on that defence, which of course has been difficult. You've got Terrell Suggs there, and it's a pretty veteran group for the most part. But last year, I think he really started to shine. Had been a bit of a liability in coverage. I think he stepped that element of his game up. He's always been a good run plugger. He's very physical in the way he attacks blockers. Some of the other guys on this list, I think, are more sideline to sideline. Mosley can do that, but I think he's more willing to take on blockers and is more likely to win at the point of attack than some of the smaller guys, your Quan Alexanders, your Alvin Smiths. And I think we're starting to see him play faster on the field. I think he's a very dynamic tackler. Coverage game, if that can continue to improve, he'll be a mainstay and a perennial Pro Bowler, I think. And maybe not quite Ray Lewis, but I think he'll make a name for himself in Baltimore. Coming in at number 4, sticking it within the division, I've got Ryan Shazier of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I loved this kid coming out of college. I'm a big fan of my fast linebackers, as you may be able to tell. I'm a Bucs fan, man. We learned from Derek Brooks when I first started watching this game. He is my favourite all-time player. So this is that kind of player in terms of, he's not on that level at this point in his career, but he's finally been able to stay healthy. I think last year we saw what he is capable of when he stays healthy. Again, incredible range. I think he's very effective in coverage. He's a really good blitzer, a good tackler. Does guess a little bit, but gets it right more often than not, and that's important. What is it with Steelers players and guessing? Polamalu was the epitome of a guy that guessed and just got it right or lucky, whichever it was. Shazier's got a little bit of that element to him. He's a fierce hitter, which is always a big plus in your backers. Again, smaller dudes, but very, very effective tackler, incredibly fast, and I think he can be utilised in a number of ways. As long as you can keep blockers away from him, he's going to make plays. Coming in at number 3, heading back to Tampa, and one of the most unheralded players, I think, since he came into the league, Lavonte David. I think he's been unfortunate in the last couple of years. Quan Alexander has sort of eaten into his numbers a little bit. Before that, you had Kuechly and Lavonte basically leading, and the Navarro Bowman leading the league in tackles. Now, Bowman is someone that would have made this list if I wasn't concerned about the injury history. I think he's not quite back from where he was before the injury he suffered against the Seahawks. He suffered another injury last season. I want to put him on the list because he's a fantastic player and I love seeing him play, but I just couldn't. But back to Lavonte David. He was having an incredible statistical career before Quan got there. Still very effective. Like most of the Buccaneers defence, I don't think he was at his best early last season, but as he got more comfortable with his scheme, started making a lot more plays. This guy will make plays in zone coverage. He's a great blitzer. Did more of that under Greg Schiano. Got quite a lot of sacks in that time frame. Is very good at reading plays. It has the speed. I think he might be the fastest backer in the NFL. Some of the plays he's chased down from behind have just been ridiculous. Makes plays in the screen game and sort of against sweeps to the opposite side of the field that you really shouldn't be making. Very good get off when he sees something and attacks it. He can be in the backfield in a flash. I expect a massive year from him this season. It's as much like with Quan Alexander. Another year in the same scheme. More talented front seven in front of him. More experienced group overall. I expect big things. From a few years ago, he was a legitimate defensive MVP candidate on this team. At least he would have been if the Buccaneers had been more successful. Expect to see him stuffing the stat sheet, doing his best Baby Derek Brooks impression, and hopefully getting some of the plaudits that he deserves. He does. Last year was not his best year, but I think towards the end of the year we started to see some of that classic Lavonte David. Again, great tackler, undersized guy, incredibly fast, and I think this year he'll be a very dynamic player. Once again, coming in. Well, what do you mean once again? Player I mentioned not too long ago, number 2 on the list. All 3 of these players actually these top 3 came from the same draft class, so what a great draft for linebackers. Coming in at number 2, the highest of those players selected, Luke Kuechly, the Panthers inside backer. If he can come back fully healthy, he's probably the most talented inside backer in football. There's a lot of similar traits to Lavonte David. Incredibly good at reading plays. I think he's a better overall coverage player than Lavonte David is. I think Kuechly between him and Shawn Lee, for me, is the best coverage backers in football. Does a great job using his eyes, reading quarterbacks, dropping into a zone, into a spot where he can undercut routes. Superb tackler, great speed, great anticipation, great play caller. Really no holes in this guy's game at all. Can do everything. He's had a stellar career to this point. My concern is his health. And I just think last year, the guy coming in at number 1 was just had a better season than him. Even had Kuechly stayed fully healthy. Kuechly, much like most of the Panthers' defence last year, had a bit of a slow start to the season. You saw him missing some tackles. So, finally, coming in at number 1, you've probably guessed by this point, Seattle Seahawks middle linebacker Bobby Wagner. He's been a legitimate defensive MVP candidate over the last 2 or 3 seasons. Intense player. If you've seen any interviews with him, I think he's in a different plane to most NFL players, but this team responds to him. He's physical, speedy, intelligent player. Doesn't necessarily get enough credit, I think, because there is so much talent around him. It is a good linebacking crew, but he stands out. I think last year, in particular, this team was probably weaker up the middle than they have been. Didn't get too much protection from defensive tackles. Saw him being, dealing with more offensive linemen getting to him. Had a tougher job than I think he's had in the past, and he did it with aplomb. Again, this is one of his players. No real holes in his game. Absolutely fantastic coverage, run game, great speed, great tackling ability, great awareness and vision. Heck of a player, and for my money at this point in time, the best non-pass rushing linebacker in all of football. So there you have it. Those are my guys. You'll notice a lot of them undersized and fast, but I think that is how today's game is played, particularly at the linebacker spot. You just have to be able to cover. I really am playing space. Otherwise, I think it's just hard to get on the field in this day and age. Hence why we're seeing so many nickel and dime packages throughout the league. So let me know, what do you guys think? Do you agree, disagree with the list? Anyone you think should have made it? Anyone you think should have been at a different position on the list? Let me know, whether it's via the comment section below on YouTube. Find us on Facebook, Cover Zero. Find me on Twitter, @SimonConboy. Always happy to discuss football. Always a fun time, regardless of topic. Feel free to get in touch. I'll do my best to get back to you. If you've enjoyed the episode, check some more out. I've covered a lot of different positions over the last few weeks as part of my weekly review. Got my QB Quandary series, talk about what teams that have a problem at that position can do in the future. I've got my power rankings coming out. They're done with a twist. Definitely recommend checking those out. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. Season previews will also be starting in July, so have a look at those. Going to be a lot more active on social media. Do a little bit of a revamp to the site or site channel. Hopefully you guys enjoy how that turns out. So as always, thoroughly appreciative of you for checking this out. If you could like, share and subscribe, check out the Patreon, that'd be wonderful, and enormously appreciative of all that stuff. And as always, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have a great evening, and go Bucks.